We've got an awesome panel. Dariush, Fred, and Max here, so we're excited to get going. The promise of Sound Carbon, what we want to talk about is really a little bit about how you have used blockchain, Web3, data, measurement, reporting, verification, how we're creating, call it the highest quality, the highest pinnacle of success within the carbon space, and how we're going to utilize that to get buyers, right? We need buyers to jump into this market and get it going. So I'm excited to be here I'm Tyler from Carbon Path. We're doing some cool stuff alongside all these folks in our project as well, which is shutting down the world's most polluting oil wells. So join us if you can in that fight. But for now, I'll turn it over to the panelists, let them introduce themselves, and then we'll kick off with some questions. Let's just go down the line here. Dariush.
Hey everyone, my name is Dariush Kamgar. I spent about a decade on Wall Street before moving over to Binance, and I'm now in the research group at Binance, focusing specifically on ReFi.
Hi everyone, I'm Fred, the CEO of the Open Forest Protocol. We have built a DMRV solution, so a measurement, reporting, and verification system and protocol for forestation projects that they can use directly on the ground, and a validation system, decentralized validation system for the data to be checked. And if that data is passing the check with this decentralized validation system, then it can create value. Obviously, carbon is something we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, hi. My name is Max Arment. I'm investing in ReFi with a new fund called Crane Earth. We're here. And before that, I founded Centrifuge, a protocol to tokenize real-world assets. So we bring things from the real world on chain as NFTs, pool them together, and then finance against them. And one of the pools that we launched a few months ago with our friends from Flowcarbon is a carbon forward pool. So we might want to talk about that. And I'm realizing I'm losing my voice. Sorry.
Awesome, thanks. So clearly we've got some real brain cells up here, so I hope I can keep up with them. We'll kick it off with Dariush. Dariush, you spent years on Wall Street using data as a tool to evaluate companies, to evaluate investment decisions. How important is data and the quality of data to the modern carbon markets in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, when you think about Sound Carbon, it's nice to make a juxtaposition between two things. On the one hand, you think about going through an investment process, right? You have all sorts of different types of data. You have your 10Ks, your 10Qs, you have the financial data you're getting, you have industry data you're getting, you have alternative data sometimes in the form of, satellite and other types of data. You have internal data sets that you might use. So you have all these different types of data that are all geared towards one thing, which is, buying a security or some sort of investment product. On the flip side, if you think about buying a product from a Web2 platform, right? Whether it's from Etsy, whether it's from Shopify, buying that product, you can touch it, you can hold it, you can feel it, you can return it if you don't like it. And you also have all these ratings as well that go along with it. So two very, very different kinds of processes. And, when I think about carbon credits, right? Carbon credits are much more like the former than they are like the latter. And really, the data that's actually supporting the carbon credit is really important to how you can understand that credit. So to a certain extent, like a carbon credit is only as good as the data that's representing it. And if that data is transparent, that's verifiable, if it's censorship resistant and stored in a permanent way, all those things are absolutely great. And then when you think about the types of data that are really important for making any sort of carbon financing decision, there's two, at a very, very high level, there's two pieces that you really need. One is you need really, really good supply figures and data that really captures what that supply is. And then the second piece, obviously, is pricing and having predictable pricing data.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so the importance of data is critical. And also, I think one of the key components of data that create trust in the carbon market is going to be that measurement, reporting, verification, right? What are the true numbers behind the project? Is the project real? How do we get there? How do we prove it? So digital MRV is super critical. And I know Fred shares this view. And you guys are doing some really cool stuff at Open Forest Protocol on improving that digital measurement verification and reporting standards and putting it all on chain. Can you talk a little bit about what you folks are doing and how you're creating what I think is an improved process to what exists out there currently in Web 2 land?
Yes, I think on taking the point that Darish was pointing out, eventually carbon is, if you look into the future and actually already now, is about accounting. And most companies in the future will be accountable for carbon in some ways. Some are already doing that voluntarily, but some companies are obliged to do that. So if you think about accounting and what's behind accounting is a value, and that value has to relate and be comparable from one company to another company, but also from one country to a country. And so if you want to have a really good accounting, you need, again, good data behind that accounting. And what is good data into our space is basically how you can visualize, how you can see the project on the ground doing the work that they're doing and showcasing that into data. So how do you actually do that today? Basically today you ask a consulting firm to do that for you, or for whoever wants to do that. So you have basically a trust issue where you have to trust someone in between, right? In between the project and you, the buyer. What we intend to do is basically put that middle part out. Why? Because we want the people to trust the data. And that's super important because we want basically you in the room, but everyone to be in a position to access that data and be in a position to check that data, easily. And that's something that doesn't exist today in the market. So coming back to the initial question is, accounting is super important, but you need the ground, the ground layer for making that accounting possible. And that's what we are focusing on.
Yeah, we couldn't agree more. At Carbon Path, we're essentially embedding all third-party verification on-chain into our product, into our tokens, and then we're allowing the world to be the verifier. We don't need to pay a third-party verifier. The verifier is already embedded in there, and we'll allow everyone who has access to the chain to look at the data and look at the experts' reviews and judge it for themselves. Is that something that you guys tend to agree with as well?
So your question is about the verifier?
The verifier,
yeah.
Allowing the world to be the verifier through transparency.
Yeah, it's a bit of that. Actually, it's not only that, but yes, ultimately, if you think about the long-term vision, you could have a process per which all of us could be verifiers. If the data is simple enough or accessible enough. In our case, of course, because we work with forest data, we'll have a set of companies that are the verifiers that know about forest. But ultimately, why not? You could be, as a company or as a person, also, checking the trees and checking the work and saying, I agree with that. It's well done, or no, I don't agree with that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We definitely share that vision for the future. Max, you were at Centrifuge, doing all kinds of cool forward financing. Now you're a VC, angel investor. What are the things that you look for in a climate positive carbon project these days?
One of the areas we look at with Centrifuge are the carbon financing or forward financing. That's an area as well as an investor where we see quite some interesting projects. Maybe just want to build up on what Darius and Fred just said in that area. When we talk about DMRE, when we talk about the data, we often think about the final product, the carbon credit or the offset itself, and the buying side, the corporate that needs to be sure that the carbon that they're buying is solid. But it starts way, way, way earlier. I mean, the main thing that we need to get done is get money into the space, get those projects financed, get money into plant the trees, get everything done, and that's where the data is actually already needed. So let's not forget that the data is not only needed for the very end, for the end product. It's actually, I would argue, even more necessary and valuable at the very beginning, where there is nothing to be financed. I mean, there's nothing tangible, there's no collateral, and you need the data to make financing decisions. So I think that is key. And that's the area as an investor where A, we look at the projects that try to solve that in a smart way, and B, as a supporting investor as well, help our startups as well to find that financing, to find those pools that they can tap into, so that they can invest in those projects.
That's wonderful. Dariush, coming back to you in Binance, you see all kinds of tokens across the sphere, right? You see utility functional tokens like what we're trying to create here with climate positive carbon projects, but you also see a bunch of perhaps less utility focused tokens. How is Binance viewing the opportunity set that I think everyone in this room is trying to create, which is let's grow a utility function, a tokenization of carbon credits and projects, and bring that to the masses? Like your existing customer base is huge, both corporates and individuals. How do we get that access? What enthusiasm are you seeing from the other side, and how do we convince them to help fund our projects?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think to sort of take that and sort of bring it to like a much broader sort of scale, maybe the 30,000 foot level, like what exactly is like the opportunity that, we're talking about here and we're looking at in the voluntary carbon market? And, I think there's been, some previous panelists today have spoken about sort of the size of the market's about 2 billion, going to about 30 billion by 2030. There's a lot of really good demand drivers behind that, right? There's about 1,400 multinational corporations that have said that they're going to reduce emissions by 2030 by about 50%, be net zero by 2050. You've got the federal government saying that they're going to reduce emissions by 65% by 2030. And you have states that are beginning to sort of fall in line under that sort of same paradigm. So the demand side of this is, it's a $2 billion market, so it's already large, but it's set to sort of accelerate massively. On the supply side, you have existing centralized registries who, for all intents and purposes, are largely still running on analog processes. So they have PDFs, they have phone, fax, like the business model that they have in place now and the way they have are sort of getting things done. That the scale, they don't have the scale to really, they don't have the type of operations that are really necessary to scale in order to support the incoming demand for the market. So I think that moving things onto blockchain type rails presents a ton of efficiencies, and I think you can really get the entire value chain of the voluntary carbon market, into a Web3 type role, from financing to DMRV, to certification, and then ultimately selling. And I think from a carbon financing perspective, pools like what Flowcarbon and Centrifuge are putting together become really interesting, right? Because they essentially begin to enable the long tail of carbon projects to move on chain. So currently, usually only the largest projects really get carbon financing. But through these different processes, you can actually enable a lot of those small projects to get the financing they need to then be able to do the digital measurement, reporting, validation that they need to get the credits, to get certified. And I think that is a key component of sort of scaling up the supply side. So I think from a holistic perspective, the types of projects that sort of enable those smaller projects are really, really interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So from your point of view, you think there's the demand side is there and growing, but oftentimes there's not enough early financing available for some of these projects to bring that supply on because it takes time. Fred and Max, how are you guys solving the financing problem up front for your projects, or some of the projects you've seen, Max? How does Centrifuge Pools help pre-fund that stuff? And Fred, how are you guys taking it from Open Forest Protocol in your projects?
So for the moment, we're basically doing the matchmaking between the people we talk to on the finance side and people on the ground. So that's a very manual process. So it's not very efficient, to be honest. But of course, we want to also address that. But for addressing that well, we need the infrastructure in place So the MRV, the validation, the carbon credit. So it's basic in the pipeline to make sure we are able at some point to integrate that. And it's not necessarily us who will be doing that, because when we started, back in 2020, we were looking at what we wanted to do, and we had this big roadmap. And of course, part of the roadmap was like, okay, so how are we gonna sell that carbon eventually down the road? And we didn't see anyone around. And now today there are people around, so that's easy, right? It's at least easier. So it's the same question with the forward financing, and there are people building that. So maybe it's just a matter of integration further down the road. What I would actually add here is that I think it's been amazing. I was in blockchain before 2020. It's been amazing to see how fast actually things developed. That is really, really surprising. I heard this morning one of the VC mentioning that we have expectations usually of what we can do in a year, and usually we think we can do a lot. And in that case, I wouldn't have expected anything like that in 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, for Centrifuge, just to be clear, Centrifuge is just an infrastructure protocol. We're not launching pools. We just provide the infrastructure, and then someone, an originator that has a creative idea about a project, launches such a pool, and then investors chime in and fund and finance those projects. And but what we see at Centrifuge, and where we want to help those originators, is to create a pool that is attractive for investors. And how is that, specifically in the carbon forward space, carbon financing? Well, to provide that pool with as much data as possible, as we discussed before, so that when you make that investment or that investment decision, you can compare it with the alternatives. And this data comes from the protocols like OFP and others. And the beauty that we see right now, compared with the traditional world, where those pools, first of all, if they exist outside, are like huge. They have to be huge. So if someone has a smaller project to be financed, just not possible. The setup costs for those pools are just way too high. And here's the beauty of Web3 coming in. You can set up we did an MVP pool of just $1 million. That was fairly easy to set up. You can't do that in the traditional world. And why can you do it in Web3? Because there's a lot of efficiencies coming in. There is the middlemen that are cut out through the smart contracts and other things, where you don't have rent seeking 12 times in the middle. There's automation in general. So that brings the cost down, and then you can set up smaller facilities, and that can finance then all sorts of projects, not just 100 million plus projects. So I think this is a very interesting and powerful feature of Web3.
I think you make a really good point there, Max, that there's the ability in Web3 of essentially, call it crowdsourcing, bringing together smaller pools to fund smaller projects. Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley may not be interested in providing $500,000 or $1 million to a project, but that could be incredibly impactful to the climate and to the world. So being able to empower the individual to make those decisions through Web3, I think, is really critical. I agree with what you said there.
To be clear, as Centrifuge, we want to get to the large pools, right? As everybody, there's the real world competition, or the Web2 competition, or the TradFi competition, just dominant right now, because price-wise it doesn't matter. We get there, but we got to start where the TradFi isn't, and that's at smaller pools and assets that are just not in scope for traditional finance.
Yeah, absolutely. Dariush, going back to Binance, I feel Binance could be a place that really bridges, larger providers of capital, given your straddling of both Web3 and tokens and blockchain, but also your ability to be, the trusted source of bringing on and making it comfortable for sort of larger corporations to come on chain. How are you guys facilitating or trying to drive that traffic onto your platform from perhaps corporations in particular, but also individuals who may be sort of Web3 skeptic?
Yeah, absolutely. And I probably should have clarified this before ahead of time. Binance US, so I work for Binance US, not Binance.com Global. We're the much smaller sister company of Binance.com Global. But, that caveat aside, I think one place that's really important for us and what we're really focused on is like where do we have overlap with existing projects right now, particularly within the ReFi space. And I think one place that there is significant overlap is once credits come on chain, right? Who are then going to be the ultimate buyers of the afterwards? And so I think lots of protocols are interested in once they have their credits, then how do we find, whether it's an individual buyer, whether it's a corporate buyer, how do we drum up demand, and how do we create the demand to then sell these and offset these? And I think at Binance.us we're very comfortable with being the on ramp into crypto for customers, via KYC processes, AML processes, and I think there's an element that all centralized exchanges can play in sort of helping institutions, whether it's corporates or otherwise, be a little bit more comfortable with sort of navigating in a Web3 world. So even if they don't have familiarity with Web3, they can still utilize it to buy carbon credits to offset for the various regulations and things that might be coming forth.
Excellent. And Fred, where do you see Open Force has already taken some great strides in leadership in creating, I would say, call it a more transparent and, for lack of a better word, better DMRV product. Where do you see you taking it further? Where are the next leaps and bounds? Are there regulations that are coming that you're going to have to adapt to, or where do you see kind of the next 3 to 5 years? Where are we going?
Well, okay, could be a long answer. I think what's very interesting, not so much into the DMRV, which is a topic in itself, is where each country is heading. And that's a topic that is super interesting because depending on who you are actually engaging the conversation with, you have very different perspectives. You have countries where they are fine with the current environment. They're not so much looking into addressing those issues, and you have countries that are really looking into addressing those issues. And why I'm pointing this out is that it's very important to understand that even though we've had conversations of not us, but the global community have had conversations to try to agree on a system, I don't think it's going to happen. So every country is going to find its own ways or its own framework within the voluntary carbon market. Some countries have a regulatory kind of environment in place, and they're already looking into VCM to kind of bridge the two. Some countries are not touching the VCM at all. So it's very important to understand where they are. The very good narrative for Web3, and not for OFP, but for Web3, is that whenever you use Web3, it's transparent. And what it means actually that a country can be part of the discussion, in the sense that they will be able to tax whatever the value is. If we talk about carbon, they'll be able to tax carbon. And that's a very, very different discussion compared to what actually exists today. Because what exists today is completely opaque. So those countries are not able to tax anything, or maybe if they do tax something, it's not super efficient. So I think that's a great conversation, not for us, but for the whole community, into engaging conversation not only with projects, with stakeholders, the corporates, but also with regulators, countries, at regional level too. And that's really what I'm looking into. When I look into 5 years down the road, I really hope that we'll have countries, part of these discussions, like with us, talking about those issues.
Fred, so that's the vision, but do you see that already? I mean, or by yourself or through others? Just really curious.
Yes, we see that. It's hard to actually be exhaustive in the sense that we haven't talked to the 200 countries of this world, but there are places where really the conversation is moving forward quite nicely. Of course, it takes time. It takes probably more time to have those kind of conversations with countries than with companies, or obviously with the people in the room. But I really, really hope that we get there. And I'm actually confident that we can get there as a community.
Yeah, those are some really good forward-thinking thoughts. I actually sometimes think if corporations and individuals act responsibly now and really embrace the voluntary carbon market, you'll outrun the regulators, and there won't need to be a carbon tax. There won't need to be these other outside parties inflicting kind of their regulatory will upon you if you've already taken those steps yourself as a corporation, acting responsibly and offsetting your emissions and taking the lead. If you outrun the regulators, what do they have to regulate, right? If you're already carbon neutral, you're in front of the game. And so I think sort of the collective will of this crowd and these people, all the people working here to try to push corporates, individuals, and nonprofits in that direction, you can solve the problem ourselves, right? Without having the need for outside regulatory control. I think we're running up on time. Do any of the panelists want to say any parting words to this crowd that stayed awake and stayed with us all this whole time?
Well, I have a last word because I think, if we look at the title as promise of sound carbon, for me is also promise of a better price for carbon, because today in this market we see that obviously the prices are really, really wide, from very low values to very high values. I think if we can work towards more precise accounting for carbon and the undervalue of that with the data-backed carbon credit, whatever the carbon credit is, will have a better price. And a better price means a better chance to addressing the climate issue at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't really agree more with that. I think, ultimately speaking, going back to what we sort of discussed in the beginning, a carbon credit being as good as the data that represents it, right? I think that, embedded in the price of any carbon credit should be either a premium or a discount based upon not only the data that's underlying and representing that carbon credit, but then also like how well you can verify it and how certain you are that it is what it says it is. And certainty matters so much in pricing anything. And so to be able to be more certain that what you're buying is what you actually think it is should be a premium that's actually captured in that carbon credit price. So I totally agree.
Yeah, trust in the numbers, verification, put it out there, make it transparent, show your work, right? Let everyone be a verifier. Let this whole room be a verifier. Let the whole world be a verifier, right? That's the future. Marissa, how are we doing? Thank you all for staying with us. This was an awesome discussion.